Did the unlikely partnership of two car manufacturers result in one of the world's fastest four-door sedans, a car so powerful it could give the legendary Ferrari Testarossa a run for its money? To find out, we'll need to start with a company called Lotus, a car company best known for its expertise in racing and also as a specialist for transforming street cars from underdogs into outright thrillers. Since 1966, Lotus have been based in their modern factory and road test facility in Vauxhall in Norfolk. The site itself was once a World War II airfield. RAF Vauxhall, and the Lotus test track still incorporates sections of the original runway. In 1982, designer Peter Stevens joined Lotus to revamp their lineup, resulting in the creation of the Elan M100, Excel Update and a restyled Esprit X180. By late 1985, Lotus was utilising its expertise in vehicle dynamics, composites and engine design to collaborate with nearly every major car manufacturer. However, their British investors realised Lotus didn't have the funds to move forward with production, and so they started looking for a buyer. In 1986, David Wickens, then chairman of Lotus, played a key role in negotiating the deals that saved the company from financial collapse, following the withdrawal of a loan by American Express. He oversaw the sale of most of Group Lotus and all of Lotus Performance Cars Inc. to General Motors (GM) by October 1986. Then, after Toyota sold its stake, GM then had a 91% share in Group Lotus for £22.7 million, gaining full ownership and control of operations. It was in the latter part of 1986 that executives from both companies decided to embark on a joint image building endeavour, aiming to create a vehicle that would evoke memories of the legendary Lotus Mark I Cortina or Lotus Type 28 from the early 1960s. The original Lotus Cortina Mark I was designed as a homologation special for Group 2 touring car racing. It boasted an innovative double overhead cam engine which Lotus had developed using Ford's own Kent engine as a foundation. This, as was proved many times, is something Lotus excelled in. GM also owned Opel, and in the 1980s Opel was renowned for producing reliable and largely forgettable vehicles, but for GM executive Bob Eaton, efficient and reliable wasn't good enough. He wanted something to shake Opel's bland image, something that would make a statement like the Lotus Cortina. It's also worth noting that during the 1980s and 90s, car manufacturers didn't have dedicated performance arms like today, such as BMW's M Division and Mercedes AMG Group. Instead, they sought help from other manufacturers. So with GM owning both Opel and Lotus at the time, it made complete sense to leverage Lotus's expertise with cars to produce the world beater GM wanted. It was also in 1986 that Jack Smith took charge of GM Europe, prompting Mike Kimberley, head of Lotus, to showcase Lotus Engineering's expertise by proposing a flagship model. His initial idea was a performance-orientated version of the Senator based on the principles of the Lotus Cortina. Jack was enthusiastic about the concept, supported it and assigned designer Julian Thompson to create a series of renderings to bring this idea to life. Bob Eaton, GM Europe's CEO at the time, envisioned launching the new LT5 5.7 litre double overhead cam V8 engine as a joint effort with Lotus, simultaneously in both Opel Lotus Senator and the Chevrolet Corvette ZR1. Unfortunately, the engine bay for the Senator proved too small to accommodate the LT5 without extensive modifications, so it was back to the drawing board. In 1987, Opel had introduced the rear-wheel drive Omega A sedan. In the United Kingdom, it was sold as the second generation Vauxhall Carlton, the first generation being a rebadged Opel Rekord, considered large by 1980s European standards, but comparable in size now to the Ford Mondeo. This sleek sedan featured impressive aerodynamics and efficient performance, earning it the European Car of the Year award for 1987. This is where Mike Kimberley took the opportunity and proposed the idea for the Lotus Carlton, or Lotus Omega for Opel markets. We understood that Opel cars were well engineered and comfortable, but they lacked excitement. I believed we could create a premium model that would inject some flair. Thus, the Lotus Carlton story had begun, with GM's ambition to shake Opel's image as a maker of sensible but uninspiring family cars. The original plan was to launch the V8-powered Omega-based sedan alongside the Corvette ZR1 at the 1989 Geneva Motor Show, again highlighting both GM performance flagships. However, the V8 wouldn't fit in the Omega's engine bay either without significant modifications, and that would require costly re-engineering and additional crash testing, neither of which GM could accommodate if they wanted to hit their deadline. Mike explained the Omega was a more robust platform with advanced engineering, including a 5-link rear suspension and a new 24-valve engine, which our turbocharging expertise could complement, and so the Omega got the job. So, with its Geneva debut looming, Lotus pivoted to Opel's existing inline-6 engine, using a newly developed 24-valve head and then adding 2 turbochargers. Lotus found a way to achieve extreme power without a V8, transforming the Omega's modest engine into a fire-breathing monster. While the BMW M5 produced 315 brake horsepower, Lotus aimed higher and wanted to surpass not just the M5 but also the Ferrari 348 and Porsche 911 Turbo, which they would go on to achieve. I wanted to push the performance envelope and set a global benchmark for acceleration, handling and safety, said Mike Kimberley. 15 prototypes were planned, but only 11 were built at Lotus, led by Tony Shute, who would go on to later develop the Elise Type 111. Ultimately, the Lotus Omega was completed on time for its debut at the 1989 Geneva Motor Show. Its unveiling sparked both admiration and controversy, leading to debates about its performance and suitability for public roads, and marking the start of numerous challenges that GM would face in the following months, which will be covered in more detail later. The result was the Vauxhall Lotus Carlton, or Omega, or Type 104 in Lotus terminology, which would go on to hold the title of the world's fastest 4-door production saloon for nearly a decade. The prototype displayed at the 1989 Geneva Motor Show was presented with split rim wheels. However, production cars went on to use single-piece forged alloys manufactured by Ronald. Prototype testing commenced in the summer of 1989 without the need for disguises, as a car had already been unveiled. Over the winter, 90 trips were made to the Arctic Circle to test the vehicle and its custom Goodyear winter tyres, while durability tests were carried out at Millbrook. During this process, Lotus resolved some early issues with axle tramp, also known as wheel hop, which is where the wheels of a vehicle, usually with a live rear axle, bounce or hop under hard acceleration. Brake efficiency was also greatly improved during this testing phase. In testing, the Carlton accelerated from 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds and reached a top speed of 176 miles per hour, with some drivers even hitting 180 miles per hour. Its stopping power was equally impressive, capable of 20 consecutive stops from 100 miles per hour without any fade. Interestingly, the Holden Commodore VN was derived from the Opel Omega A sedan, but Holden made numerous adjustments, including changes to the suspension, steering, interior and drivetrain. Despite the similarity in door shells, the VN was wider with distinct styling, dimensions and components tailored to the Australian market and preferences. By spring 1990, pilot production had begun, with full production starting by late summer. The Lotus Carlton had one engine option, the Lotus 3.6 litre double overhead cam straight 6. To get there, Lotus began with Opel's X30XE or 3-litre GSI engine, and a small team of engineers assembled the engines, following Aston Martin's approach, where each engine was built individually by one engineer, though Lotus didn't adopt Aston Martin's practice of mounting a brass plaque on the engine showing the completion date and the builder's name. Keeping a 24-valve cylinder head and by increasing the stroke, Lotus upped the capacity from 3 litres to 3.6 litres. They also modified the engine for better gas flow with a reduced static compression ratio of 8.2 to 1 over the factory 10 to 1. The cylinder block was then strengthened to handle the increased pressure. The crank was replaced with a forged item machined by Machine and Fabric Alfing Kessler. Forged rods were fitted, as were forged Mahle slipper pistons, originally designed for racing, and hydraulic tappets were also fitted. Its all-new exhaust system was then added, which exited through twin outlets. To To boost this car's performance even more, Lotus added a pair of Garrett T25 turbochargers, which also saw service in the Ford Escort Cosworth. These were charge-cooled, the Lotus name for its liquid intercooling system. These turbos provided a boost of up to 0.7 bar and also gave a more linear wind-up. The fuel injection system was managed by the GM P4 engine control module, which controlled 6 AC Rochester injectors. Additionally, the ignition system was upgraded to an AC Delco type. The original design concept demanded 100 brake horsepower per litre. It's a figure Lotus actually bettered, with the new engine producing 377 brake horsepower, which, for an example, gave it slightly more bhp than that of a Ferrari 355, which sat at 375 brake horsepower. Although Lotus experimented with an all-wheel drive version of this car, it was found that this would be too complex and add a considerable amount of money to the final price. So the decision was made to keep the current rear-wheel drive system in place. The Lotus Carlton was then equipped with the ZF S640 6-speed manual transmission from the C4 Corvette ZR1 with a conventional H+1 pattern. The S640 was also used in other high performance vehicles such as the Holden Commodore VN Group A SS. To connect the engine and transmission, Lotus installed a heavy duty clutch which was reputed to make shifting gears feel like a workout. The limited slip differential used was sourced from the Holden V8 Commodore VN. However, despite this car's high power, it was not equipped with any traction control. The Lotus Carlton was also fitted with speed-sensitive power steering and self-levelling suspension taken from its sibling, the Opel Senator. These features helped both improve high-speed stability and reduce camber change under load, enhancing the car's overall handling and performance. The wheels were specifically designed with the rear wheels being larger. They were 8.5-inch J by 17-inch at the front and 9.5-inch J by 17-inch at the rear, where J is the flange type. Manufactured by Ronal, these one-piece cast units were crafted to enhance cooling for the car's ventilated disc brakes. These Ronal wheels were shod with exclusive Goodyear Eagle tyres, with 235 by 45 ZR17 at the front and 265/40 ZR17 at the rear. Custom made by Goodyear and can be identified by a small Greek letter Omega on the side. Due to lack of space, the Lotus Carlton came with an 18-inch bright red Space Saver wheel stored behind the carpet panel on the left side of the boot, intended for emergency use only and not to be driven at speeds above 50 miles per hour. To enhance braking performance, GM partnered with Bosch to create an advanced anti-lock braking system. The brake discs, inspired by Group C racing technology and supplied by EP, were custom designed for Lotus using 12.9-inch or 330mm vented discs with 4-pot calipers at the front and 11.8-inch or 300mm discs using twin-pot calipers at the rear. The Lotus Carlton featured independent front suspension with coil springs, Lotus-tuned McPherson struts and an anti-roll bar. Its rear suspension used a multi-link setup with semi-trailing arms mounted on a crossmember, paired with progressive rate coil springs. The fine tuning of the suspension and chassis made the Lotus Carlton more competitive against many of the high-performance sports cars of its era. The Lotus was available in only one colour, Imperial Green, a 2-coat pearlescent paint, which is a very dark green that in anything but direct light appears black. Breaking this up were its all-green tinted glass windows. The body kit, designed in a wind tunnel specifically for the Lotus Carlton, included a rear wing, twin bonnet vents, body skirts and wider wheel arches to accommodate its broader wheels. This aerodynamic design resulted in a drag coefficient of just 0.307. Classic Lotus emblems were placed on the fenders and either a special black Opel or Vauxhall emblem was placed on the bonnet centre, dependent on the model. On the rear deck it also carried the wording Lotus on the left and either Carlton or Omega on the right, again depending on the model. The interior was also only available in one style. Each car came standard with anthracite, an almost black colour, Connolly leather seats with a unique ruched design to provide both comfort and luxury. The Connolly leather was also applied to the doors, as were light grey suede inserts. The The front seats also featured power adjustments, allowing the driver and passenger to find their ideal seating positions, and for those cold days were equipped with heating elements. Walnut veneer inserts. These inserts were also carried over to the door cappings and around the base of the gear stick. The dashboard featured clear and easy to read gauges, providing all the essential information. A speedometer that went up to 180 miles per hour, where the standard Carltons only went up to 140, a fuel gauge, a temperature gauge, and above all, a Lotus badged rev counter. Plus, most importantly of all, it was given an analog clock. For entertainment, it was fitted with a Grundig radio cassette and used typical 90's cassette storage. The steering wheel was a padded leather rimmed 4-spoke and showed either Lotus Carlton or Lotus Omega, again depending on where the car was purchased. Each Lotus featured an identification plate on the right side of the glove box displaying the production number. The plate was labelled Limited Edition Lotus, whether Carlton or Omega, followed by a 4-digit number starting with a 0, where the 3 digits after the 0 represented the car's production number. This car came in at 1,663 kilograms, and whether a Carlton or Omega, it still carried the customary Lotus designation of Type 104. It had a top speed of 176 miles per hour, could go from 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, and run the quarter mile in 13.6 seconds at 108.8 miles per hour. The top speed of 176 miles per hour was, however, limited, but it is said if you redline the Lotus in 5th and then shifted directly into 6th, this should bypass the limiter and potentially allow you to reach speeds of up to 190 miles per hour. At one point it seemed very likely that Irmscher, a German car tuning and manufacturing company specialising in Opels, would handle the assembly of the Lotus Carlton. However, Mike Kimberley successfully advocated for production to occur at Heffel. This process meant the cars would now have to go from Opel Rosselheim, Germany to Heffel, Norfolk. Only 2 modifications were made to the donor Omega 3000 GSIs on the Opel production line in Rosselheim before they were shipped to Lotus. These were pre-cutting the 2 ventilation holes into the bonnet and painting the car in imperial green. The cars would arrive as runners at Lotus, making it a lot easier to drive them on and off the transporters. Once safely in the former DeLorean development shop at Lotus, they were disassembled. All the trim was removed and the seats sent off to be reupholstered. The engines and gearboxes were taken out, crated and then sent back to Germany, while the running gear was also removed. The floor pan and transmission tunnel were modified to fit the new engine and gearbox. The wheel arches, especially at the rear, were enlarged to prevent the larger wheels and tyres from interfering with the bodywork. While the work progressed, the engines were built from the ground up with all new parts by a small team, with 1 engineer assigned to each engine, Aston Martin style. Once the body modifications had been completed and the aerodynamically designed body kit fitted, the engine and gearbox were then mated to the body shell and the front and rear suspension systems were installed. The all new leather interior was refitted, and following its final checks, each car underwent a brief test on Lotus's own test track before onward shipment. Each car required approximately 150 hours to complete, a process far less efficient than standard production lines. By the end, Lotus had created a sedan that was not only exceptionally fast, but also a true high-performance vehicle, capable of rivaling some of the most iconic sports cars of the day, even surpassing the Porsche 911 Turbo and Ferrari 348. Only 17 Vauxhall dealers were selected to handle the sales and service of the Lotus Carlton, a task made even more challenging by the high number of applicants, over 250. As Peter Batchelor, Vauxhall's sales and marketing director, explained, the limited production made it unfeasible for all dealers to offer this car. Vauxhall recognised that the Lotus Carlton's performance might surprise many customers, so the £48,000 price included a day of intensive driver training. This course, offered with the Institute of Advanced Motorists and the Jim Russell Driving School, combined theory and practical experience at Donington Park, though participation was optional. However, the Lotus Carlton, or Omega's bubble, depending on which side of the English Channel you sat, was about to burst. To understand how, let's go back to 1984 1989 and the car's debut at the Geneva Motor Show. During the show, the Lotus Carlton was criticised by a number of major newspapers for being too fast for the road, with the Daily Mail in particular even campaigning to ban it. The Association of Chief Police Officers described it as an outrageous invitation to speed, leading to debates in Parliament about whether such a high-performance vehicle should be permitted on public roads. The car's ability to irk the British government and the media only enhanced its legendary status. For Mike Kimberley and his colleagues at GM, the controversy presented a significant challenge. Bob Murray certainly stirred things up. We were in the middle of celebrating our success when Autocar published this article and left us bewildered, Mike said. Bob Murray was the influential editor of Autocar magazine, which at the time had significant clout with car manufacturers globally. While we were proudly showcasing our achievements alongside Ferrari, Lamborghini and Porsche, Bob's negative stance ignited a media frenzy that even caught Parliament's attention. We opted not to engage directly, said Mike. The British government criticised the car, deeming its affordability compared to Ferraris and Porsches outrageous. The underlying classist sentiment suggested that high-speed vehicles should remain a luxury for the elite, making Vauxhall's everyman car particularly contentious. Road safety advocates voiced concerns about a family car reaching supercar speeds, leading to a brief debate in the House of Commons about its existence. In response, GM eventually stopped advertising the car's top speed, and these discussions soon faded without significance. Then came the cherry on the cake. The Lotus Carlton earned a reputation as the ultimate getaway car. One of the most famous stories of criminal wrongdoings in the UK involved 40 RA, a Lotus Carlton stolen in the West Midlands in 1993 and then used in a series of robberies and ram raids. The police were unable to keep up with its speed, eventually conceding defeat, further cementing the car's status as a legendary performance machine. It has been said that 40 RA even outran a police helicopter and eventually meeting its end in a canal. Today, the 40 RA number plate again graces the Lotus Carlton, which paradoxically is owned by the original owner of the Carlton that was stolen back in 1993. The Lotus Carlton was launched in 1990 with a substantial £48,000 price tag, around £125,000 today, and production ended in December 1992. Initially, General Motors aimed to produce 1,100 units, but due to the early 1990s recession and the high price tag, sales were disappointing. By the end of production, only 950 cars were made globally, 320 Carltons and 630 Omegas, falling 150 short of GM's original target. Despite these challenges, the Carlton outperformed its competitors like the BMW M5 with its top speed of 176 miles per hour, also surpassing the German automaker's cap speed of 155 miles per hour for their sedans. In 1991, Pininfarina designed a concept car for GM, a two-seat coupe based on the underpinnings of the Lotus Carlton, the Cronus 1. It was unveiled at the Detroit and Geneva Motor Shows that year as a static model. What was unusual about the Cronus 1 was its glass roof, which was impregnated with liquid crystals, and when an electric current was applied to it, it darkened instantly, keeping the sunlight and prying eyes out. Then, in 1992, the Cronus 2, a fully functional prototype, was developed. Similar in proportions to the Cronus 1, its main difference was headlights, front bumper and paint job, powered by the 3.6 litre engine from the Lotus Carlton and boasting a top speed of 190 miles per hour. Pininfarina hoped GM would put the Cronus into production, but GM left it as a concept, likely viewing it as being too similar to the Corvette to justify production. Unfortunately, on the 27th of August 1993, GM sold Lotus for £30 million to ACBN Holdings, controlled by Romano Artioli, who also owned Bugatti. Then, in 1996, Artioli sold Lotus to Proton, a Malaysian car maker. Lotus continues to produce high-performance sports cars, focusing on lightweight and agility. As Colin Chapman said, simplify then add lightness, exemplified by models like the mid-engined two-seat Elise. The Lotus Carlton, or Omega, depending on your country of purchase, was a true sports sedan. Its understated dated design featured subtle luxury touches like wood trim and air conditioning, which hid a roaring engine with performance capable of outpacing many sports cars of its era, including Porsches and Ferraris. The Lotus Carlton was a true performance machine and a formidable contender in a world of luxury sedans that could only be truly bested by the Lamborghini Diablo. Today, as electric cars dominate, the Lotus Carlton stands as a reminder of an era unlikely to be repeated, leaving enthusiasts to wonder what Lotus Engineering might achieve with a modern day Vauxhall insignia.